Hey, it's been a hot minute since we last talked, hasn't it? Yeah, about that.
So, when I started writing the script for this video, it had been roughly 1 month since I last did any sort of anything on this channel. Now it's been about 2 months with no activity from me, including any sort of update videos explaining as to why I've been quiet. A lot happened, and without going into my personal life too much, the past couple of months have been a difficult time for me. And being the depressed little bean that I am, I naturally respond to difficult times or periods of mental health struggles by self-isolating. I haven't exactly been idle during this time. In fact, I've gotten quite a lot of work done on a certain personal project. However, the time I've spent working on said project has kinda come at the cost of me doing, well, anything else with my spare time. And I'm not happy about that, which is why I plan on doing something a little bit different today.
For those who might be new to my channel, in 2022 I began creating a Fire Emblem 8 ROM hack called Darius the Conqueror. Originally intended as a side project to help me get out of a creative rut I was experiencing with another project I was working on, Darius the Conqueror ended up becoming a project that I enjoyed working on to the point that I switched to making it my main focus throughout the rest of that year and into 2023. And after roughly a year and a half of near continuous work on the hack, I did something that I rarely ever accomplish and finished a long-term project, completing the main story of Darius the Conqueror and making a completely playable game from start to finish. While I never posted the hack to the FE Universe forums due to, let's just say, being on the outs with the community there, I did regularly make videos showing off my magnum opus that I plastered all over my YouTube channel. In fact, those videos are probably how you came to discover me in the first place, given that some of the showcase videos for Darius the Conqueror rank among my most viewed videos on my channel. Overall, reception to the initial version of Darius the Conqueror was very positive, and I was content with the end product for a time, if only because I was proud of myself for having successfully completed a project like this without giving up on it. However, a small trickle of more critical comments about the project, combined with having time to mull my thoughts over, caused me to realize that I ultimately wasn't happy with this version of Darius the Conqueror. The pieces of something truly great were there, but I was so focused on getting the project done before I burned myself out on it that I didn't give myself the time to arrange them with as much care as I would have liked. I felt like I could have done a better job with the level design, or paced the story better, or thought out certain gameplay mechanics better so that they didn't make the hack as much of an unfocused clusterfuck to play. And yeah, I'm sure some of you may be thinking that I'm being too hard on my own work, and you're probably right. But in my opinion, a good creative is rarely satisfied with his own art, especially if he feels like circumstances led to him cutting corners on it. Thankfully, there was a solution to my dissatisfaction with Darius the Conqueror. After flitting around between a couple of projects that ultimately never got completed, I ended up taking some time to sit down with Lex Talionis, an engine designed to emulate the FEGBA games, and eventually I got to work on a remake of Darius the Conqueror designed to take advantage of the engine's many features and interesting tech. And not too long ago, I finally started showing off a quick proof of concept demo for what I'm calling Darius the Conqueror Director's Cut. This project aims to take advantage of both the many cool features of Lex Talionis, as well as the lessons I've learned from working on various different Fire Emblem ROM hacks in order to create a version of Darius the Conqueror that I'm happy with. In addition to revamped maps that actually feel like they have some thought put into their design, the project aims to have a myriad of custom skills, unique mechanics, and cool features that I hope will elevate this from a standard Fire Emblem game to something truly special. So without further ado, welcome one and all to the first episode of the Darius Devlogs. So before we get into the new stuff, I'd like to give a quick primer on the project for anyone who might be coming into this video knowing nothing about it. Fire Emblem hacks and fan games are just as much about creating stories and worlds as much as they are about designing a fun and enjoyable game, after all, so it makes sense to give people a little taste of what the plot is about. Darius the Conqueror takes place on the fictional continent of Angaran, a land that used to be ruled by the Dragovian Empire, a powerful island archipelago nation that was effectively the Roman Empire of its era. The Dragovians had the ability to tame wild dragons and turn them into war mounts, which made their army the most powerful military of its time and let them conquer nearly the entire continent. However, at the height of its power, the Dragovian Empire suffered a bizarre catastrophe known as the Pyroclasm, where the 7 volcanoes that dotted the island archipelago erupted in a giant explosion that sank the island and destroyed the Empire's seat of power. With the sudden death of its capital, the territories of the Dragovian Empire would eventually fracture and split into separate kingdoms, and the wild dragons that served as the symbol of the Empire's power would slowly be hunted to extinction over the years. Fast forward about 500 years, and the northernmost region of Angaran, known as Isengard— No, not that Isengard, it's spelled differently. Fast forward about 500 years, and the northernmost region of Angaran, known as Isengard, is split into a collection of city-states that control territory, known as dioceses, fighting wars with each other for territory. However, a new threat has recently emerged in the region, that being Vandalos, a realm of brigands and raiders that has slowly begun pushing into the rest of the region, pillaging and sacking cities and towns as they go. For as much as these Vandals are a problem to the people of Isengard, the main kingdoms of the realm consider their neighbors more of a threat, and as such they've largely ignored the actions of these brigands, allowing the clans of Vandalos to grow strong. In a remote part of the Diocese of Stalgard, a young man named Darius is living a peaceful life with his mother, father, and sister, kept safe from the turmoil of the rest of the world by the geography around his home. However, one day Darius and his sister Julia have a chance encounter with a strange man being harassed by bandits. They are quick to come to his rescue, but unknown to the two, this ends up putting their village in the sights of a brutal Vandalosi warlord named Havgan, the chieftain of one of the most powerful bandit clans of the region. This in turn leads to Darius' village getting burned down and his mother, father, and sister being killed at the hands of the Vandals, with Darius only barely escaping the destruction thanks to plot armor, aka the awakening of his latent magical powers. Luckily for our young hero, his fortunes soon turn around, as while recovering from the grief of losing his family, he stumbles across a strange rock that turns out to be the egg of one of the last remaining dragons in the world, which promptly hatches. After bonding with the dragon inside and naming it Barbarous, Darius decides to embark on a quest to get revenge on Havgan and the Vandals who turned his world upside down. However, as the game's title might imply, our little dragon lord is destined for much bigger things than merely getting revenge on one man. After all, having your own pet dragon in a world where no one else has one gives you a lot of power. Maybe enough to rule your own kingdom? Now, I'll admit that the premise of this story isn't exactly the most original thing in the world. It's a pretty standard setup for a hero's journey. Plus, if you're at all familiar with A Song of Ice and Fire, the books that Game of Thrones is based off of, certain details of the lore of this story will probably sound familiar to you. But in my opinion, the really great stories are the ones that take familiar setups and find a way to tell them in new and interesting ways. And I think that's the real thing I'm going for here. It's a straightforward setup, but for me, the real heart of the story is how I utilize my own experiences, thoughts, and feelings to make the world, characters, and their struggles feel real. A large part of why I wrote this story in the first place was because I was going through a difficult time and needed to tell a story where a character would go through some terrible disasters and come out stronger on the other side. And given some of the things I've been going through recently, I think it's a story that will end up being just as important to me now as when I first began penning it. If you're interested in getting a little taste of the story, I did a live stream of me playing through the first demo of the game that you can watch, and I included a link to the demo if you feel like playing yourself. You can also take a look at the videos I've made showing off the initial ROM hack if you want a rough idea of where the story is going to go, since the structure of the story isn't going to drastically change with this remake. Most of the story changes are going to be centered around fleshing out what's already there, giving certain characters more depth, and trying to pace the story better. Oh, and finishing support conversations, since that's something I never was able to do with the original. But with that out of the way, it's time to move on to the really interesting part of this video, which is all the stuff I've worked on since the initial demo showcase. In the time since releasing the initial demo of Darius the Conqueror Director's Cut, I've gotten a decent amount of work done on the project, particularly in terms of new maps. I generally like to tackle projects like this in chunks, working on finishing sets of chapters at a time so that I don't feel like I'm doing too much at once. It's especially important to pace yourself with projects like this since there is a lot that goes into making an RPG, and doubly so for one like a Fire Emblem title where you have a lot of additional dialogue for things like support conversations. Not to mention, in my case, I'm composing an entirely original soundtrack for this project, which means I have even more work on my plate than usual, so that's fun. The second demo I'm going to be releasing for Darius the Conqueror Director's Cut is planned to be playable up through Chapter 12, which will encompass the prologue chapter, 12 main story chapters, 3 optional paralogue chapters, and a handful of interludes and explorable town maps. In fact, I may be underselling just how much work there is left to do for this leg of the project. In addition to all the work that goes into designing and playtesting the maps, there's also the process of writing the story, writing support conversations for several dozen character pairings, various other bits of flavor dialogue, working with the overworld map, designing town segments with side quests for the player to do, fixing glitches, and there's a lot of fucking glitches I need to fix, doing work on skills, writing little fun bits of lore for the game's codex feature. Yeah, you get the idea. It's the sort of thing I have to be in for the long haul with. And part of being able to keep myself sane on the project requires that I focus on specific elements of it at a time and work towards getting them done before moving on to the next thing. At the moment, that's most likely going to be me working on the gameplay element of chapters and getting them to my liking as best I can on my own. Before looking at the new chapters, however, let's talk about the only major change that has been made to the parts of the project that I've shown off. New character portraits. Yes, no longer is Julia stuck being an exact replica of Lilina. Now she and Darius have proper new designs that make them look like actual OCs unique to this game. Darius in particular has 2 mugs made for him, one for his initial design as a simple villager, and one for after he promotes into a strategoi. I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Aqua for drawing out concept art for these characters, and to Ramarush for making the portraits used for them. I know that some people might have some attachment to the original free-to-use repo mugs that I used for characters in the original version of Darius the Conqueror, and I will say that not every character in the game is going to get a new portrait. However, a lot of them will, particularly the demi-human characters like Winahea and Thanatos, who look more unconventional compared to the rest of the cast. I've put a lot of work into coming up with a bunch of different races and characters in this world, and I want for them to look as fun and interesting as I imagined they would be. That being said, both the concept art and the actual graphics require money to get made, so it's going to take a fair amount of time for me to get them all commissioned, and that'll probably be one of the big things that will slow down production on the game. Now, let's talk about what's coming up for the game in the future. Once the player clears Chapter 3, they'll be given access to the overworld, which they'll be able to traverse much like in Sacred Stones. However, at the moment, I don't have a proper overworld map implemented or even made, aside from a couple of concept sketches that I've done on my own time. Currently, my solution to this problem is having chapters be broken up by base segments at the start of each chapter. You will be able to access the base from the overworld map in the final version anyway, so this temporary solution will be enough to help keep the rough idea of how the game is going to play. The base will provide the player with a bunch of useful functions, including a place to allocate bonus experience into their units, and yes, the initial 4 playable chapters from Demo 1 have been edited to award you bonus experience to spend on your units going forward. Bexp is something that I'm really interested in playing around with, as both a way to reward players for certain side quests, and also to give players a way to bolster weaker units without needing to put up with the RNG of arenas. That being said, I do want to design the game in a way that you won't have an excessive amount of BXP to spend on your units. I'd rather it be used mostly as a supplement to regular training, rather than it being something of a crutch like it can be in the Tellius duology.
Speaking of the Tellius games, like in those games, the player will earn extra bonus experience for clearing chapters under a certain time limit, so moving quickly on certain maps is highly encouraged. This is mostly just a way to discourage players from dicking around too much and dragging maps out, and oftentimes you'll have to wager getting kills against remaining enemies on a map versus gaining extra bonus experience from clearing the chapter fast. It adds another layer of strategy to map progression, which, given that this is a strategy game, is a pretty worthwhile thing to do.
The base is also going to have a special market that will normally only sell the most basic types of weapons and items to players, but it will occasionally sell special items like stat boosters or rare weapons in limited quantities. In the final game, most other weapons and items will be sold at shops in different explorable towns, but for the time being, the base's market will end up being updated with what will be sold in those shops at the point where they would normally become available. Like I said, this is all just a temporary way of having the gameplay be set up to function roughly how I plan on having it in the final release.
Now, onto the main gameplay chapters themselves. At the current time of writing this, I have a rough draft for the gameplay side of all 12 chapters that will be playable in Demo 2. I'll probably post a link of this rough vertical slice of the gameplay to my Discord server at some point so people can playtest the game. So if you'd like some early access to the project, then maybe mosey on over to the description and click the link down there to join the server.
Some of the maps for these chapters might look familiar to you if you've played the original version of Darius the Conqueror, while others look quite different compared to their original versions. While I largely have grown to dislike most of the maps from the original Darius the Conqueror, there are still a couple that I thought looked decent, and I ended up porting them over into the remake. The rest of the altered or brand new maps are a mix of free-to-use maps from the community resource repo, mostly ones made by Aurowolf, maps that I created by myself, and maps that I collaborated with my friends Armory and Coneybites to make. Personally, I feel like map construction is one of the skills I'm the most lacking in, especially when it comes to maps that have a lot of mountain terrain. That being said, I don't really want to rely on free-to-use maps that much, since it can lead to a hack feeling less unique if it uses too many stock maps. Mostly, the free-to-use maps are just there as a supplement to help save on time and get done with chapters a little bit quicker. As for the actual gameplay design of the maps, there's a lot that I could go into in terms of enemy placement, eventing, and how I want the maps to feel, but I think that would be best gone over in a separate video where I detail the process of making a chapter. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see me do in the future. That aside, there are some fun things that these maps will do that I think are worth discussing. For example, Chapter 6 is going to be built around the gimmick of there being two enemy factions that will not only be hostile towards the player, but also towards each other, with you needing to take advantage of the chaos to rout both enemy factions. Chapter 7 will not only be a fog of war map, but will also introduce the gimmick of how weather conditions will impact your unit's movement. If you've played FE7, you might remember that rainy or snowy weather would cut all your unit's movement in half, and it was not a particularly well-liked gimmick by the fandom. Personally, as much as I don't like how Blazing Sword handled rain, I did always think it could have been an interesting gimmick if it was tweaked a little bit. As such, I've decided to alter rain and snow to work a bit differently. Now, instead of simply cutting every unit's movement in half, it will instead cut flying units' movement in half and increase movement costs for cavalry on certain types of terrain. I've always felt that mounted units were a little too centralizing in most Fire Emblem titles, and I wanted to try and find ways to give them just a few more restrictions so that infantry units would get more of a chance to shine. Lastly, I'd like to take some time to discuss some of the characters that will be joining the player's party in these new chapters. As those of you who experienced Demo 1 in some form or fashion might know, there's going to be a smattering of brand new characters to play around with, and that certain characters from the original cast are going to have their backstories slightly altered. And indeed, there will be some completely new faces you'll see the farther you go into the story. For example, in the original version of Darius the Conqueror, there were these two characters, a cavalier named Castor and a fighter named Pollux. Despite the two being named after a famous pair of brothers from Greco-Roman mythology, they actually didn't have any real relationship with each other, which I felt was a little bit of a missed opportunity. As such, I ended up reworking the characters a little bit to have different dynamics with each other. Castor, aside from getting a completely new portrait, is largely going to remain the same character you know and love from the original version of the story. However, he now has a new brother to bounce off of in the form of Pollux, the red cavalier to his green. Meanwhile, the OG fighter, who once was named Pollux, is now named Kato, and while he will retain some character traits of his original self, he's going to have a very different backstory to match his new name. This is one of the more noteworthy instances of characters getting reworked, and other alterations are probably going to be a bit more minor. But I think it'll go a long way towards rounding out the cast and letting me have some fun with making new units. I also plan on having some characters get new and interesting recruitment methods as well. In the original version of Darius the Conqueror, Viper the Thief joined as a result of a story event, but in the director's cut, I plan on having her be recruited via a side quest you can partake in while visiting one of the game's towns. Obviously, as town segments are currently not live in this version, any character who otherwise would join during them will just automatically be added to your party at the time they would normally become available to recruit. For example, right now, Viper will just be magically added to your party at the start of the second paralogue, since that's the earliest chapter she'd be available to the player. Another big part of character reworks will be skills, and in particular, character-specific skills. One of the major advantages of using Lex Talionis over FE Builder is that I'm no longer limited to a specific selection of skills to try and build a list of class and personal skills from. This time around, every single character is going to get a unique skill that will reflect their personality. And on that note, I'd like to take a moment to extend another thank you to Ramarush, who was responsible for programming most of the personal skills for the characters of Demo 2. He really has done a lot for me with this project, and I'm incredibly grateful for his help, especially since I'm not the best at doing these kinds of things myself.
One idea that I want to play around with in coming revisions of the project in terms of the skill system is the idea of units earning skills through supports. The broad concept for this mechanic comes from Fates, where units can gain additional reclass options through supports in order to gain extra skills, a system that I always thought was a neat idea. My version will simply cut out the middleman. Whenever characters reach A+ or S rank in their supports, they'll gain one additional skill, usually one that comes from their partner's class line. Although there may be some exceptions in cases where characters from the same class line are supporting one another. For example, Castor and Pollux being both Cavaliers who support one another. I think this will be a neat way to help give characters more identity beyond their personal skills, as well as a way to customize the way certain units play.
And that's everything I wanted to talk about for right now. There's definitely a lot of details about characters and maps that I left out, but I think it's important to leave something to the imagination, so I don't want to go spoiling things too much right now. That being said, I do want to make this kind of video a more regular thing, so hopefully I'll be back before long with another devlog. Let me know if there's anything in particular you want for me to cover next time around, and I'll see if I can cover it. I do want to try and make more of an effort to get other people's input on this project, so I'll be making a new channel in my Discord server for discussion, playtesting, and feedback for the project. If you'd like to try the demo out for yourself, I'll leave a link to the project page on FE Universe, which has a download link to Demo 1 that you can play. Until next time, please do take care of yourselves, and I will hopefully see you back here sometime with another video. Luck and good health be with you. And indeed, there will be some completely new feces. God damn it.